York Empire experts. It's week 4, and this one is, listen, very much by popular demand. Everybody was clamoring after the first 2 weeks for the medical side of things. How do we stay healthy? How do we keep our kids healthy? So this one is called Priority Number 1, Healthy Athletic Performance at All Ages. And it's going to dovetail off of what we worked on last week, but it's really going to focus not only on youth athletes and some of the pitchers and throwers in our program, but also their parents and other adult athletes at every level, from the weekend warrior on up to the professional. And the reality is that we had so much demand for how do I get healthy, stay healthy, or recover from injury that, look, Greg, like I said, no tears, and Dr. Virk, please, no tears on this one. Look, we call it New York Empire Experts, and I think we've had an incredible series of panels up to now. No offense to anybody prior to this week, but these are the experts. In my career in this industry, nobody has influenced me more in a shorter amount of time in terms of my own intellectual curiosity, expanding my knowledge and the knowledge of our entire organization. Greg, Dr. Rose, you have already impacted thousands of children and athletes in our organization without even realizing it.
Thanks, Brian. That means a lot. That means a lot to me. Thank you.
Well, I'll tell you, I think that I studied with Dr. Tom House for the better part of 7 or 8 years. And when I spoke to him over and over about what you had done with him, I had aspired secretly to be smart enough to have a meaningful conversation with you, not just study the material. And you know, I was fortunate enough and curious enough to finally last year come out and train with you. Eye-opening would be an understatement. I like to think that we are a progressive and innovative organization on our own who really prides ourselves on not thinking that we know everything, but instead realizing we know what we don't know and we're excited about it. Mm-hmm. And then I sat and I didn't miss a beat. And I retook your training and learned even more. And what the impact that you've had, forget about our organization. I mean, Dr. Rose, I can't thank you enough for being here tonight.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It means a ton. It really does. Thank you so much. Hopefully Absolutely. I can share some things. Yep.
Well, Dr. Mandeep Virk, I was, you know, over the course of what has become a very fortunate baseball instruction and coaching and research career, recently got named to become pitching consultant for NYU Langone Sports Performance Center. And it was particularly exciting because I was an NYU graduate and a pitching consultant to their baseball team, but even more exciting to be on the research and analysis side of what they do, and get invited 2 years ago, I think, Dr. Virk, to a panel, and in walks Mandeep Virk, and I had read about you and spoken to Dr. Cardone about you and all the folks at the Performance Center. And when I had read that you are innovative, everybody talks about that word, oh, he's innovative, isn't it? I marveled. The approach, the personal touch that you gave to people. And there were 2 words that came to mind when I decided that I wanted to bring the 2 of you together for our athletes and audience that you both live by, and it's innovation and individuality. And I think that's very unique because historically the sports industry was all about, you know, how do you create a program that's going to touch 1 million people all at once and they'll all pay for it and be happy because that's scalable business. Well, Dr. Rose, as I'm sure you're going to share tonight, that's not the most effective nor efficient way to do things, even though maybe it makes the cash register ring in the short run. And Dr. Virk, I can't imagine that there are many sports orthopedists who early in their career were, let me see if I get this right, assistant team physician to the Chicago Bulls, assistant team physician to the Chicago White Sox, and that was just on your way up. You know, for most people, that's the pinnacle. That was just on the road, and now you're here at NYU Langone, and it was all true. The introduction that I was given about innovation and individuality and a personal touch to patients was exactly what I experienced. And that was only in the first webinar that I got to sit on with you, or panel that I got to sit on with you. So again, thrilled to have you here, and thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So listen, we have more questions that came in than any other webinar we've done. So let's jump right in. If you could, Dr. Rose, share a bit about your background, because I'm selfish. I love your story, as I know so many other people do. So share a bit about your background and how you landed where we are right now.
Well, it's been a long journey. I always say everybody has turning points in their career, and I've had many. I started out as a University of Maryland engineering student. Thought I was going to go become a civil engineer. I was like building roadways and houses. Realized real quickly that I didn't love engineering. I decided to go into medicine. Long story how that happened. I'll spare you the details. Decided to go become a chiropractor. Actually graduated engineering in Maryland, went to Iowa to a school called Palmer College of Chiropractic in Davenport, Iowa. When I went through chiropractic school, I got to year 3 of our chiropractic school, which is when you go into your internship. And we have a 1-year residency basically for chiropractic. And the biggest problem with chiropractic is, no matter what anybody tells you, I'm going to tell you the real deal. The biggest problem is when you go into your residency, they actually track how many patients you see, and you can't graduate until you see a certain number of patients. But I don't know about you guys, but anybody want a student chiropractor to work on you? I don't think so, right? So most people were like begging people to have somebody, to work on. And it wasn't like the hospital or the center you're at provided you clients, you had to get clients. And to make a long story short, kind of had to come up with a business plan of, all right, how am I going to graduate? How am I going to get enough patients? And kind of what do I want to do when I grow up? What do you want to be when you grow up? It's always a good question to ask yourself. And one thing that I fell in love with when I was at Maryland is I fell in love with the game of golf. And I was like, you know what? I really want to become a golf chiropractor. That was kind of my dream. And so I said, I might as well start here at college. And I started working with local golf pros. I would go out to the golf course. I'd go out by myself. They would pair me up with some people. Usually somebody would complain of pain. I would say, hey, I'm a local, chiropractic student here. I treat just golfers. And it was kind of my game plan, my marketing game plan. And lo and behold, I actually became the first person to actually get enough numbers to graduate in my class. And I was like, hey, this golf chiropractic thing is a pretty cool business. I moved back to Washington, D.C., opened up a practice called Advantage Golf in 1996. And I always say, listen, it's better to have good timing than to even be good. Like, timing's everything. In 1996, something else pretty special happened in the golf world, and that was Tiger Woods, right? So Tiger, that was his first year. So the year I opened, Tiger started, and everybody was looking at this young phenom, and they're like, man, what does this guy do that's different than everybody else? Who knows something about, conditioning and fitness and golf? And that was kind of my focus. Is I opened this practice. Everybody told me I was crazy. You can't open a practice just working with golfers. And I was like, well, that's what the eye doctor said when he said he was going to open up a clinic just for eyes. It kind of worked out for him. And basically all of a sudden the whole golf world was interested in conditioning. Before it was just how much beer could you drink. Now it was, hey, I think these guys are athletes. And it just exploded. I actually ended up having over 3,000 patients within 5 years. Built this a huge practice right outside of Washington, D.C. And the reason I tell you this story of how I got the baseball is in the year 2000, I was approached by a golf professional in Baltimore, Maryland, who asked me to work on a good client of his. He said, this is one of my top clients. Could you see him? And now he's 10 years old, but his dad's going to come with him. I'm like, no problem. So this golf pro brings in this 10-year-old. This 10-year-old's name was Peter Uline. If you know anything about golf, he's actually on the PGA Tour now. I took him through what we did. Didn't realize his dad was the CEO of Titleist. After we were done, the dad was like, hey, this is incredible what you're doing. I'd love to help you. And I was like, how can you help me? Then he explained who he was. And he said, hey, listen, I really think that the average golfer, they lose 5 golf balls every time they play, by the way, true stat. And he said that if we can make the average golfer just play a little bit better, hit the ball a little bit farther, play a little bit longer in their career, not get injured, it's billions of dollars to Titleist. And he was like, I'd really like to help support your initiative to get golfers more fit. And again, to make a long story short, in 2003, he offered me to come out to San Diego, California with that golf pro, Dave Phillips, and open up a performance institute. So like everybody knows the Yankees have a training staff, the Lakers have a training staff. Well, no golf company ever had a training staff. And he approached me and Dave and said, hey, we would love to build one for our players worldwide and love for you guys to run it. So he had to twist my arm. And in 2003, moved out here to San Diego, California. This is where I'm at right now. This is the Titleist Performance Institute, what we built. So it was basically the training staff for all Titleist players worldwide. So we work with the best golfers in the world. We've been doing that for over 15 years now, and turned into a pretty cool research and development lab. And one of the things I always tell people in their career is the best thing you could ever do is surround yourself with people who are smarter than you. And that's something I've done really well. I created an advisory board out here at Titleist. We have 53 men and women on our advisory board, but our original 8 included a man that, Jordan, you and I both know by the name of Dr. Tom House. So a guy from the baseball world that obviously was always into biomechanics and conditioning, and he was always willing to share. And so he became part of our advisory board out here to kind of help us do what we were doing in golf. And in 2004, after we kind of got things launched over here, he kind of came back to me and said, hey, I love some of the stuff you guys are doing, some of the technology. I'm wondering if maybe you'd be interested in doing some of this in baseball. So I dragged Tom into golf. He dragged me into baseball in 2004. And now, fast forward to current time, in 2014, we launched a company called OnBaseU University. So we actually do education and coaching for baseball coaches, conditioning experts in the baseball, softball world, and medical experts. And we consult with almost half the MLB teams. We have trainers and coaches. Almost half the people that are certified in our OnBaseU University actually work for MLB teams. So I actually spend, believe it or not, Jordan, I don't even like to say this out loud because most people look at me as a golf guy. I spend over 50% of my time now on baseball and softball. So that's how I got here right now. Like I said, you never know what you're going to be when you grow up. Right?
Yeah, that's a much longer conversation. I love it, and thank you for sharing, because it really is. You hit it on the head, and I said it at the top of the hour. You want to surround yourself with people smarter than you, and I'm looking at my screen right now, and that's what I've done tonight. So I'm kind of proud of myself on this one, and I'm proud of our organization. So thank you again, Dr. Virk. Same thing. Interested in medicine. Next thing you know, Bulls and White Sox, and here you are today. How did this all happen?
So mine is not going to be that long. I was born and raised in India. It's a small country with a population of 1.3 billion. So, played sports growing up. Soccer was big for me. I played in the junior league for my state for good 3 years. And then somehow, I can't explain how, but switched gears and got into medicine. And did my med school, did my orthopedic residency training from UConn, University of Connecticut. And then went on to do shoulder and elbow fellowship at Rush, which is where I had an opportunity to take care of these elite players. And then my first job is NYU as a shoulder and elbow expert, and basically treat everybody from the age of 10 to 12 all the way to 100, 120, whatever they need with respect to shoulder and elbow. So in addition to this, I do translational and clinical research. So a good portion of my time is spent in, tendon stem cells in terms of outcomes after, arthroscopic surgeries, elbow surgeries, shoulder replacements. And that pretty much is where I am right now.
Welcome, and thanks for joining us. Like I said, it's an eye-opener being on that first panel with you, so I'm happy to have you back. I want to jump right in because there's 2 words that we kicked off with were innovative and individual. And you both kind of share that as an approach. Dr. Rose, Dr. Virk, what does that mean, right? Why is innovation and individuality so important? And why is it even a concept? It seems at this point in time like common sense. Everybody should be taken care of uniquely, yet it had never happened. So, Dr. Rose, you want to kick it off?
Sure.
Just explain the approach.
Well, I think the best way to explain this is that most players, if you've ever gone to a coach is going to watch you perform whatever let's say you're a pitcher, watch you throw. If you're a hitter, watch you hit. And they're going to evaluate you based on, in their mind, a style that they like. So in other words, if they're like, I love Mike Trout, and I think the way he hits is great, they kind of create a philosophy of a technical philosophy based on things they like, based on style and looking. So in other words, usually all of us have experienced this. If you're a baseball player, let's say you've gone out and your coach is watching you and they take a video of you and they're going to go review the video with you, and they split the screen and they put, let's say, Mike Trout on the right and they put you on the left, and they go, let me show you what Mike does and let me show you you. Well, when you do that, what you're saying is you're saying that I think you should do what Mike's doing. Because most coaches have, like I said, a style bias to coaching. They think that, hey, what he's doing is working and everybody should do that. Well, what we now know is that by testing guys like Mike Trout, if we go through and we physically test them, the things that some of these athletes can do are just sometimes doesn't seem human, right? Some of the things so some of the strength that these guys possess, some of the range of motion, the mobilities, the coordination, things they can do are incredible. Now, before I tell somebody to go do that, it's like you said, or it's kind of common sense. Shouldn't I check to see if they actually have those physical skills too? So in other words, if I'm telling you to get into this position, the first question you should ask yourself is, can you physically do this? And you don't have to be a genius. If I said, hey, listen, how many 18-year-olds that are playing right now in baseball can physically do what Mike Trout can do? What percent do you think could do that?
I think most, 0, right?
I'd say most people would say it'd be a low number. So then why are we comparing you to somebody who can physically do things that you can't do? So you either have two choices. You either say, okay, well then why don't I pick a model that has performed really well with maybe a different, like a body type that's similar to mine, or can I change my body to be more like Mike Trout's if I want to compare to Mike Trout? So I guess what we're saying from an individuality standpoint is the first thing you should do, no matter what sport you're talking about, is figure out what you can physically do. And then try and look in the sport, are there other people with the same physical restrictions or limitations, and have they reached the highest level? Because what you'll see is if you can't do something physically, it doesn't mean you can or can't play. It just helps explain why you should do it this way versus this way, right? So I always say, like, we do lots of movement screening. You know, like I also own a company called Functional Movement Systems, or FMS. Like we have a station at the NFL Combine, at the NHL Combine. We screen elite players all the time. And I always say, listen, if you fail a movement screen, it doesn't mean you can't get to the highest level. It just means the way you do it will probably be a little different than the guy who can do that movement screen, right? Which is really important. So the key of individuality is there's not a limitation. It's just knowledge is power here. And this is from coaching and from training. So once I know what you can and can't do, I can build a swing or a pitching mechanics that will be the most efficient for you because it's the thing that you can physically do. There's nothing more frustrating than a coach telling me to do something because they like this style of another player, but I can't physically do it. That's frustrating for me and for the coach. And that's something that we're completely opposed to. Instead, we say, hey, let's figure out what you can do first, and let's try and build something that works for you.
So Dr. Virk, I want to build off of that. One, innovation and you know, aside from stem cell research, which in itself, right, okay, game over, we can stop the conversation there, right? But innovation, individuality, and what you do and taking care of individual patients, does some of what Dr. Rose just talked about play into the way that you treat patients and injuries that come your way with, you know, typically shoulder and elbow injuries for golfers, tennis players, baseball players? Does the individuality affect the way they've either gotten to you or the way you're going to treat them?
I just lost you there.
Are we back?
Jordan, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Do you hear us, Dr. Virk?
Okay, yeah. So I just lost you in the middle. So can you repeat the last part?
So yeah, the last part is, does the individuality of what Dr. Rose just talked about affect either the reason that people are coming to see you or the way that you then treat them?
Yeah, so I think it's pretty much on lines of what Dr. Rose mentioned. So for me, from a medical standpoint, you know, every person, every player is unique, not only in what they can deliver, like, you know, Dr. Rose mentioned what they can do, but also in their expectations. There are some people who just want to play on a weekend and they want to make sure what they can do and what they can, for example, after a treatment of tendonitis or after a surgery. And then, you know, there are two athletes who play the same sport at the same level. They may have different needs. So I, as a physician, when I encounter them, which is usually when something is wrong with them, patients don't usually come to me to just, you know, say like, hey, I'm going to be playing, I'm just seeing you so that, I should say some marathon runners would come before the marathon to make sure any small little ache or other stuff, they can run it by me. But by and large, people have some problem when they come to see me. So my individuality is to know what the player does, what position they play, what level of sport they are in, and what's the future for them. And then with their problem, I will tailor my treatment. You know, a guy who's not a pitcher, who comes with a complete UCL tear, it's his senior year, he just wants to graduate and then go and become a lawyer, he doesn't need a Tommy John surgery. Whereas if there's somebody who is a starting pitcher, is in his peak, can redshirt, is going to pitch, his coach, his team, everybody's saying like, listen, he's a very strong prospect and he's got a complete tear, I'm going to give him an option of Tommy John. So the individuality comes from knowing your patient. Since we're talking about sports persons or athletes, knowing a little bit more about them so that I can tailor that very treatment, which may be totally useless in somebody else.
So you know what, I was going to hold this until much, much later in the conversation when we got into the real nitty gritty of baseball. But you know what, you brought it up. Let's go. Preemptive Tommy John surgery. It's been talked about now. It's even been executed for years under the guise of, well, you're probably going to need it. You'll be better off because I think Dr. House says something like 80% of pitchers recover from elbow injuries, very few recover from shoulder injuries to get to peak performance. Preemptive TJ, should we sign up the hundreds and hundreds of kids that are pitching for us as soon as the virus goes away? Should we knock down your door rather than go see Dr. Rose, or maybe do both, but should we line up for preemptive TJ?
I think you brought up a very important point. As you know, Tommy John surgery is now considered like an epidemic. After this Corona thing, everybody understands pandemic and epidemic pretty well, those terms. So Tommy John surgery came as a surprise when people put in registry data showing, an exponential increase in surgeries in adolescent high school pitchers. And again, I think it is an inappropriate thing to do in a young athlete, especially when they don't have a complete tear, when their position or the position they play at does not need a Tommy John surgery. So I think for me, the indications for a Tommy John surgery are very selective. So when you make it selective, you're not doing more than 2 to 5 a year. If you're doing 30, 40 a year, unless you are a major, because you're taking care of teams, that's a red flag. And there's a common myth that once you have TJ, you're going to throw faster, which is totally not correct. You are undergoing a surgery that has an extensive rehab spanning anywhere between 18 months to 2 years. And you have the whole world working for you in terms of physical therapy and occupational and throwing mechanics and whatnot. And the only vivid memory that you have of your throwing is when you were really slowing down. You didn't have the memory of when you were at your peak. So you say like, oh gosh, I'm throwing faster than what I used to, but that's incorrect. So I think these are all the myths, and it's kind of like an epidemic, which has now come down by increased awareness by not just the MLB and other leading organizations, but also, by our medical societies.
So, I want to stay along this point, right? You said it's not appropriate. We talked about this a little last week, and sitting where I sit, I'm where the rubber meets the road, right? I get to take what Dr. Rose has uncovered for the world and what you do when someone gets hurt and bring it to life, right? And all too often, and when I say all too often, I mean all the time, people tend to come to me from outside our organization and come to New York Empire from outside the organization after they've gotten hurt and they realize something is wrong with what they're learning. And I go back to their physician to find out more. And consistently I hear, the player has little league elbow. He needs to rest and return to play. Mm-hmm. Dr. Rose, Dr. Virk, rest and return to play following medial elbow pain, anterior shoulder pain, posterior shoulder pain. Is that the right prescription?
So, a lot depends on what I find through physical examination and what diagnosis I establish. But I think everybody on this panel is going to agree that majority of injuries are overuse. They are the injuries that will get better with time, and some, and a very few, I shouldn't even say some, are the ones that need some sort of knife. So when I treat shoulders, less than 16, I feel like I got to have a very solid indication to pick up a knife. That solid indication has to be a fracture where there's no ambiguity. 100% people in a panel will say, listen, you got to do this. Between 16 and 18 is a gray zone where I will pick a knife only if patient has a documented indication for surgery and has tried all exhaustive maneuvers. When I say exhaustive maneuvers, they have to span over 6 to 9 months, unless it is an acute dislocation of the shoulder. After 18, things change a lot. The biology changes, the demands of the athlete changes, and henceforth. So answering your question and not deviating, I think just saying that rest and go is not enough. As I said, majority of these are chronic overuse. I have to figure out why this thing happened. Rest is just to give a break to that cycle. Unless, and I'm not the alone person who's going to be figuring that out. It's going to be the coach, it's going to be the trainers, it's going to be the athlete, the parents, and everybody. Hey, is it too much overuse? Is it inadequate rest? Is it poor technique? Is it inadequate conditioning and things like that? My part will be making sure that the kid gets all the medical treatment. But if he goes back into that vicious cycle again, he's going to show up again after 6 months.
So I love to add one thing is that I always use this analogy, Jordan, is that imagine every day you get in your car and you take your car out, you go 40 miles an hour and you slam into a wall. Okay. Every day you do this, you just slam into a wall. And after a while, you're like, you know what? My neck is freaking killing me because you keep giving yourself whiplash. Do you think resting your neck for 3 or 4 weeks is going to help when you go back out and slam into a wall again? The problem isn't your neck. The problem is you're slamming into a wall. You need to stop slamming into the wall, not rest and relax, right? So like you just said, is the key is you've got to figure out why they're getting hurt, right? So if someone comes in with elbow pain, so you should always ask the question is, why is your elbow hurt, right? Very rarely is it the elbow that's the problem. It wasn't like you were born with a dysfunctional elbow. You're doing something to create that excessive torque or stress in that UCL or something that is causing you to get injured versus somebody else. And to me, that's, a statistic that sucks from our industry is that the #1 predictor of athletic injury is previous injury. Now, a lot of us used to say that, all right, so here's what that means. Let's say, like you said, should you go get Tommy John surgery? Like, should everybody just get preemptive surgery? Well, first of all, if you said 80% get better, do you want to be the 20%? Like, you don't want to do that. That's #1. #2 is if I look at the statistics, like I said, if you go get injured and then you go into rehab for 2 years, you do everything right? You're still probably one of the highest risks of injury because of that previous injury, which means we can't fix the thing that was broken, or because I actually don't think that's the reason, or we actually weren't treating the right thing in the first place. In other words, the reason your elbow tore wasn't because your elbow was the problem and you did all this rehab on your elbow, it's because your lower body wasn't working properly when you pitched and nobody did anything about that. So you still have the origination of the problem still there. So I feel like the biggest problem we have is a diagnostic problem, is people don't know why they're getting injured, and all they do is they chase the source of pain, they correct it, they rehab it, but they go back out and they don't realize that that wasn't the cause of the pain, that was the source of the pain. And the cause is still there. And like the doctor said, it could be from a mechanical perspective, it could be from just a overuse perspective, it could be the way you're sleeping, it could be some of your non-baseball daily activities that are doing these things. You've got to get to every time someone says, okay, here's your problem, you've got a torn labrum, you should say, why do I have a torn labrum? When you get to the point where you can stop saying why, now you've got to the cause. And it's amazing on how many people are treating the source and not the cause.
So go ahead, because I've heard you say it and I've read it. And when we share it with people, they're in disbelief. Dr. Rose, I want to hear you say it in front of hundreds and then thousands of people are going to watch it afterwards. Are you telling me that there's a 14-year-old somewhere in some organization that has medial elbow pain right here, and instead of saying, hey, I need elbow surgery, they should see how their ankle or their hip moves?
I'm definitely not going to tell you that there is a 14-year-old. I'm going to tell you the majority of the 14-year-olds, that's the problem, right? So if we look at this as The question is why is your elbow breaking down, but the pitcher next to you is not? You should just ask yourself that question. Like, what's different about the two of you, right? What's different? Normally, and just think of this with common sense standpoint, the part that's working the best gets overused and breaks down, right? It's the squeaky wheel gets the oil. It's the one that's working the hardest is the one that kind of breaks down. Like I tell this story of like, imagine if we came into your baseball academy and there was 1,000 bricks placed all over the facility, and we're like, why are all these bricks here? We got to play baseball. So we're like, everybody grab a brick, and we all grab a brick and we start moving a brick, and we come back in, and half the kids go, you know what, those bricks are heavy, it kind of hurts my hands. And we say, oh, then don't worry about it, you sit down. So then the rest of us start grabbing bricks. And then sooner or later, all the kids, besides you and me, Jordan, everybody's finally said, you know what, this is too hard. And they're sitting down and they watch you and I do this. And you and I, like a typical day, we do all the hard work, right? We go and we bring all the bricks out of there. Let's say it takes us an hour to get all the bricks out. In an hour, who's going to be complaining of pain? It's going to be you and me because we're doing all the work, right? The 100 other kids that are lazy doing nothing aren't in pain, right? It's the ones doing all the work. So if your elbow hurts, I'm probably thinking you're the one carrying all the bricks. Your elbow's doing all the work. So where are the lazy guys that aren't working? Usually if a dysfunctional lower body, if you can't create power and transfer power properly from your lower body to your upper body goes, screw it, I'm just going to use my upper body more. And they put that overstress on the arm or the upper body, and then it breaks down. And now you can go rest that all you want, but until you actually give it some help and let the lower body contribute to this power generation, it's always going to break down.
So Dr. Virk, if you agree with Dr. Rose what just said, and look, I've been living it now happily because the way we address problems is exponentially better than it was even 3, 4, 5 years ago. If you agree with what Dr. Rose is saying, is there an innovative new approach in the future of medicine, particularly sports medicine, that could be more holistic or better at preempting the knife and helping players to recover?
So, I think Dr. Rose made a very important point. I like the way he gives examples, so I'm not that good at it, but I'll give you a very simple example. So, if you have a small ball in your hand and the only thing you can move is your wrist, you can try throwing it, it's going to go to a certain distance. The difference between a lot of players is not going to be different. And then you tell them you're allowed to use the elbow, and then they'll use the elbow and they'll throw, but they can't move their shoulder, and their reach as well as their throwing distance is going to increase. And then you tell them that you can use your shoulder, but you can't move your trunk and you can't move your lower body. You have to stay straight. They'll be able to throw. So whosoever is able to externally rotate his shoulder the max is going to throw the farthest if he has power as well. So there's flexibility and there's strength. And then you suddenly tell them you can rotate your trunk, you can use your torso. So whosoever is going to generate the kinetic energy starting from the lower part of the body, maintaining stability and transfer it to the upper extremity is going to throw the farthest. Speed, precision, and accuracy obviously needs practice, but if power is not there, it's not going to go at that. So that's how I try to explain the kids who come in and say like, hey, we want this kid to throw faster. You're not treating his shoulder. The shoulder pain is making him he's not going to go into a college. And that I say like, listen, I'm a surgeon. I can fix broken parts, but techniques that are broken, styles that are not appropriate and conducive to this kid, which is unique in certain ways because he has more laxity than other kids, or he's more stiffer than your day-to-day kid. He needs an individualized approach to mitigate the risk of injury and improve his technique and speed. And then, whatever he has the capacity to deliver, he will deliver. Yep. As you said, you can't make everybody an MLB star athlete, even if they practice for the same time, have the same coach and everything. So that was part of the answer. And then you had a question regarding any innovative treatment without using the knife, right? Where, I think education, my role comes very late. And I wish I could have a more prominent role, but I think it's Dr. Rose, the trainers, coaches, the coaches who treat minor league kids or coaches treat younger generation. And, that's where they can tell them like, listen, if you have pain, you got to tell me. If you're tired, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you.
Tired, you got to tell me. All those things count, making sure they're not pitching throughout the year. Every athlete misses that, but I think we have to also pay respect the Mother Nature. But
Jordan,
nothing more fancy, in medical world that I could inject them with or, feed them to, make them like star athletes.
Yeah, Jordan, I would just point out there that it's probably not advances in medical science, but definitely advances in biomechanics and from coaching. Like Doctor said, we can now actually hook players up under a lot of these sensors. We can see if your lower body is contributing to your overall power generation, or you just dominating from your upper body. And it's pretty amazing what we can do now to identify those breaks in efficiency as players do their performance, whether it's throwing a ball, kicking, striking, it doesn't matter. Technology has allowed us to do some really, really cool things. Almost look inside the athlete, see how they create power, how they transfer power. And it's amazing, like we'll have, players that come in with Tommy Johns. You can almost, like I said, the reason I make that comment that almost all of them are usually caused by some type of lower body dysfunction is not my opinion. This is just based on when we're measuring these athletes, there's almost always a dysfunction in the lower body with these players that come in with upper extremity issues. And it makes sense.
Let's turn the corner then, right? What can we do as a young athlete? What can an older athlete do to stay away from Dr. Virk? That was the polite way of saying it, right?
No,
what do we need to do? Because I love what you said, right? There's a different approach to coaching, and it's interesting. Doing this over a decade now, and the number of times that you hear a trainer talk to a surgeon, talk to a coach, and collaborate on an athlete's training has been minimal up to now. And that's mind-blowing to me, right? There's more money in professional sports than maybe almost any other industry on earth, yet the lack of collaboration is what both of you have called for, right? All we have to do is talk to each other to help an athlete. So what can anybody on this call
do? I think you're asking a very important question, which is you're asking like, why are all these injuries happening and what are things we can do about it? So first of all, to stop injuries from a youth sports perspective, you have to get the total global picture of why this is happening, right? So we talked about not having individuality in program design. Of course, that's one thing. There's the early specialization, right? So basically, if you just play baseball, we now know that one of the things that is very let's say similar amongst the players that play the longest is that they actually didn't specialize in their sport until after their growth spurt. So we're talking after puberty, like 13, 14 years old. And what they did before that, which we all did when we were kids, is like Doc said, we played multiple different sports, right? We played different sports, and that helps create this athletic base, right? And then we put the sport specific on top of it. If you just go sport specific and you're like, I want my kid to be an MLB, so we're just going to start pitching when they're 6, and that's all we're going to do is pitching, we're going to have a problem. I'm sorry. You have to have an athletic base for longevity. At least that's what the data looks like. If I look at the pitchers and the hitters who have the longest careers, they tend to come from a multi-sport background, right? So that's number one. Number two is in the past, because we played multiple sports, there'd be downtime. We'd actually have an off season, right? So I'd play baseball in this part of the year, and I played soccer this part of the year, and I played, football this part of the year. Well, that downtime is like we talk about rest and recovery. It was built in. Like you only played for 4 or 5 months, and then you went to did something else, and it gives your body time to bounce. Now, I mean, look at me on the PGA Tour here. Our guys have 1 month off a year, right? They play 11 months a year, and you're earning FedEx Cup points. If you're not there, you're getting left behind, and it's insane. Like there's no downtimes. And I see baseball clubs acting like this with 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, and the kids are playing year round, and they're just going to get burnt out, get injured, all the problems. So we have the amount of volume with no downtimes. And then there's so much more science out there now to understand how to develop power. Listen, even if you do everything right, if you hit a wall in a car going 50 miles an hour, you have a much better chance of living than if you hit going 100 miles an hour. So now we have kids that are throwing so much faster at a young age where they don't have an athletic base, they have no downtime, and everyone's wondering why we get these injuries. I'm like, really? Is this too hard to understand why we're getting these injuries? So the way to, if you're a parent and you want your child to, if you want to go to the Olympics and win a gold medal, if you want to play in the World Series, right? Well, you should act like the ones that have done this before and the ones that have been there the longest. And what they do is they don't really specialize. They have multiple sports. There is definitely a downtime, right? They build a nice solid foundation of the strength, flexibility, stability, athletic skills before they add speed, right? They don't just go into weighted ball programs on some kid who has no business being on a weighted ball program because he doesn't have the base foundation of athleticism, strength, power to handle these speeds. It's almost too obvious. Everybody goes, oh, it's just pitch counts. I'm like, it's so much more than just pitch counts. Like, let's talk about all the things and that's just the start. I mean, I could talk about this for an hour, Jordan.
I've been talking about it for 10 years, so join the club. Thanks for jumping in with us. Dr. Virk, I mean, look, I think the key takeaway there is right in line with what somebody just dropped into the chat. What advice do you have for the parent of a 7 or 8 or 10 or 12-year-old who wants to be a healthy, long-term, developed, successful athlete? And by success, not, major league shortstop, but successful. I played, I had joy, and I was healthy for as long as my genetics would take me.
Yeah. So again, from my standpoint, my advice is going to be, most of the time the parents want their kids to achieve what they could or could not achieve. That's a very common theme that I see in parents. They get emotional when they see a kid injured because they feel that their dream, which was supposed to be fulfilled through their kid, is now not going to be fulfilled. And the poor kid has no idea. He thought he was playing for fun, didn't realize he was actually on a mission. So number 2 is teach your kid how to identify fatigue. Fatigue and injury go hand in hand. If he feels that, oh, the coach just says like, if you can't work through pain, you're just, I don't want to use the word, but you're not a man. Yeah. So he should have awareness, which is difficult for a young kid where, the other kid is getting preferential treatment because every time the coach says you're going to pitch, he says yes. Even though he's hurting, he's pitching. So identifying fatigue, preventing injury mitigation, because it's like, the race horse. If the horse is injured, he can't participate in the race. So if the kid, 6-year-old, and you're dreaming that he has a healthy sport lifestyle for a long period of time where he not only enjoyed and achieved what he could, teaching them about warm up, teaching them about adequate stretching, teaching them about strength training of not only the body part that they are using in that particular sport, but starting from the toes and ankle to the arch of the foot, to the heel lengthening, to the hamstring stretching, quad strengthening, and whatnot. So physiology, which is where, Dr. Rose and other people who are involved in training of these kids or educating is very important. So those would be my big things, in the office when they're injured is, listen, identify fatigue, mitigate the risk of injury, have a proper mechanics or whatever sports you're playing, take help of everybody who looks at you. And if you do get injured, don't take it easy. Rest, ice, acute measures, and then it has to be gradual unless it's a very minor injury.
So Dr. Rose, let's jump right in. I mean, he's in your wheelhouse now, right? What is age appropriate training? And, Dr. Virk said you need to warm up, and you need to warm up everything. When the 3 of us were growing up, this was a shoulder warm up, right? Yeah. And we've since learned, don't go stretching mobile joints. And we see it all the time. Every field I go to visit a team that says, hey, could you come out and evaluate and help us? I see this, and they count to 10 as they pull on their shoulder before they're warm, right? So what's age appropriate training? What's the right way to warm up right now?
So those are two totally different conversations, but let's go through each one of those. Let's talk about the warm up first. You know, I always say, let's say you've got, and you're right, Doc, I like analogies. Let's say you've got two cars. Say you've got let's say you've got a old, let's say 1970 Chevy truck, right? One of these classic pickup trucks. And then you've got this new Porsche SUV, right? If you're gonna go take those out on the freeway, which one needs more warm up probably? You know, I mean, I think everybody knows if you got one of those beaters, one of those old trucks, you probably don't want to just go floor the gas pedal. You probably want to start it, warm it up a little bit, drive it around maybe 20 miles an hour, 30, build yourself up to some speed, then go. Now, if you've got a brand new Porsche SUV, you probably just slam the gas pedal down and take off. You'll probably be fine, right? So I always like, let's ask yourself first and foremost, what are you? Are you a Porsche SUV or are you a 1970 Chevy truck, right? And just got to be honest with yourself. If you need time to warm up, there's nothing wrong with that. That truck will go 70 miles an hour on the freeway. You just want to warm it up first, right? So first and foremost, everybody's warm up is different depending on what we are, you know. And I always like people to know this too: is you don't want to have a new body every time you compete. So when you train and you practice, you get used to like, hey, I can turn my shoulders 70 degrees, and you get used to timing this, and I know how much I can move my arms. If I decide right before I play, I'm going to go do this new stretch, and I'm going to stretch my trunk, and now you don't have 70 degrees, you have 90 degrees now. That sounds great, but if you've never spent time to coordinate 90 degrees, well, now your coordination is going to be off. You might swing harder than you're used to. Your timing can be off, and it can actually make you play worse. So before you play, what you want to do is you want to warm up to what you're used to, right? In training, so not before I go play, I might want to work on my trunk range of motion if I want more, but that'll give me time to go practice it. So before I play is very different than before I train, right? So before I play, I want to kind of activate. I want to warm up my body to what I'm used to, my normal, let's get to my normal range of motion. Now that sounds, it's a pretty broad statement there, but I think like, let's take that to practical. Like, let's say you're a pitcher, right? And you are told, go get in the bullpen, go warm up. All right, what the hell does that mean? How many balls are you throwing, right? Jordan, do you guys have like a rule of thumb on how many balls they should throw in the bullpen to warm up?
So it's interesting. It's actually unique to the individual.
That's the right answer, right? It should be, because basically what you should have is you should say, well, okay, in practice, we've actually put a radar gun on our pitchers, right? And we have what we call our ramp time and our sustain time. Our ramp time is how many balls does it take for me to get to my maximum velocity? And some pitchers, it might be 10 balls, some might be 5, some might be 20. Like, I need to know how many balls, how am I a truck that I need to do 25 balls to get myself to my maximum velocity, or my Porsche just takes me 5 and I'm ready to go, right? And then once I get to my maximum velocity, I like to know how long I can stay at that speed before anything breaks down. So I might be like, hey, I'm a 10 ramp guy. It takes me 10 balls to get my velocity up to where it's maximum, and I can go 70 balls at maximum speed. Well, now I think that's important for coaches to know. Like we talked about before, like, how do you prevent these injuries? Well, if I'm a coach, I know exactly each one of my kids' ramp times, sustain times. So if I take a kid out there to practice and I go, okay, let's go get warmed up, we'll put him under the gun, and I know it takes him 10 balls to get to his maximum speed, but today he's thrown 10 balls and he's not even close. I'm going to go up to him and go, what's up? You okay? Like, do you need some recovery? Like, today might not be the day, right? Like, how do I know as a coach so that the kid can't lie to you? You take data. You actually track these things. This is how you do this, right? And so we know exactly what their ramp times should be. We know how long their sustain time. So if I got them in a game, I know when they need to, okay, I know his fastball is not going to be his fastball anymore because we've already hit the number that he can maintain. I think those are all incredibly important. So warm-up, number one, has an objective. The objective is, I'm either going to prepare myself to go play, so I'm going to activate. I like to do more things like with bands or dumbbells or body weight exercises, more like strengthening to wake the body up, get everything moving. That's warming up the truck to go play, but I'm not trying to create a new truck right now because I want to go practice with what I have. I like to know from my warm-up and my mechanics, like how many swings does it take on the bat before I get to maximum bat speed? How many pitches does it take before I get to my maximum, so I know what my actual technique warm-up should be. And then I should have some type of count so I know how long I can sustain this. Now, if I'm going to go do a warm up before I train, well, maybe I want to go from 70 to 80. I want to be able to gain 10 degrees. So now I'm going to actually do some things to try and build a new body inside the gym. And that warm up is going to be different than the one before I play. So warm up it's not as simple as like people call us all the time. Can you give me a good warm up for baseball players? I'm like, which baseball player? Who are we talking about? Right. So it's very different. And then your second question is age specific training. Now this is, you know, I do a 36-hour class on this, but on age specific training, like I'll give you an example of how important this is. And I tell parents, the more you learn about this, you realize you only have one chance to do this right, and you can't go back in time, right? And it's scary, you know, some of the stuff. So like, let's talk about probably the easiest one to understand is strength. Okay, if you want to build strength, there's really only a couple ways to make somebody stronger, right? So first of all, let's talk about the easy way. The easy way is your brain. Your brain sends a signal down to your muscles, right? And it's through a nerve called a motor nerve. And these nerves are what you use to contract your muscles, right? So if I say, hey, I want to swing a bat and I need you to fire your oblique abdominals, which helps turn your trunk. That's a muscle. I want to fire this muscle. Your brain tells your oblique abdominals to fire, but what most people don't realize is it sends a signal from the brain, but when it gets close to the abdominals, this signal breaks into thousands of signals. These motor nerves break into smaller nerves that go along the entire length of the muscle. And our bodies are amazing. When the brain says fire the oblique abdominals, it doesn't say fire all of those. It says fire what you need. Like if I'm gonna go pick up a pencil, it might say you only need a couple of those. If I'm gonna go pick up a 1,000-pound brick, it's gonna say we need more of these, right? And that's to conserve fuel. That's for a lot of different reasons why your body's like this. So when you're born, you really don't know how to turn on all 1,000 at once. You really only know how to turn on a few at a time. But as we practice any type of exercise that involves strength, our brain starts to learn how to activate more of those nerves at once. So believe it or not, there's a neurological component of strength. And when most people start doing strength training, their muscles aren't getting bigger. They're learning how to fire more of those motor patterns, motor nerves, and activate more of the muscles. So that type of strength training can happen from birth, right? So people are like, hey, is my kid too young to do strength training? I'm like, you're never too young to do strength training. We can teach you how to get your muscles to fire more, like body weight exercises, medicine ball stuff, even swinging weighted bats. All those things are teaching you how to fire more motor neurons, which is neurological strength is huge. And so you want to start doing that right away. But now if I want to take a muscle and make a muscle bigger, that's another way to get strength. It's called hypertrophy. Hypertrophy is I tear a muscle and the muscle goes, well, obviously it wasn't strong enough, so let's make it bigger. Now, to do that, there are imagine little cables inside your muscle that when you tear a muscle, you can actually build more cables, right? They're called myofibrils, and these little cables can make your muscle thicker and fatter. So if I really want to make your muscle stronger, I can kind of try and build bigger muscles. But to do hypertrophy, that's a different story than nerves. I now need to actually chemically and physiologically build bigger muscles. To do that, I need the building blocks. Now, muscles are made up of they're made up of proteins, right? And if you eat the right things, we have these proteins, that's why people take protein shakes, you've got the proteins there. But like a brick wall, when your proteins are like the bricks, you need the mortar to kind of put these together to make your muscles bigger. Well, that mortar that your body uses is actually a hormone called testosterone, right? And this is why you hear all this stuff about testosterone and with drug testing, is that it can actually accelerate how well you can build these brick walls or bigger muscles. But here's the thing that we now know is that most kids don't really have enough testosterone that you need to build muscles until puberty, right? So you say age-specific training. Okay, so what do we do before puberty? We do neurological strength. I don't give you heavy loaded barbells because if I tear your muscles, it doesn't grow back bigger. You just get injured because you don't have the building blocks. You don't have the mortar, the testosterone. But as soon as I get into your puberty and we actually track your velocity of how fast you're growing, and once we know that you're at a certain point where, hey, most kids your age, like 95% of them now are surging with testosterone, well, that's one of the best times in the world to get hypertrophy. So we actually target our training based on your developmental age. And that developmental age, that affects everything from neurological, like we just talked about, from skeletal, from physiological, like cardiovascular type of training. All those things are developing as you start from a young baby all the way through. Even like speed training. Another interesting thing is like if you want your kids to get faster, you know, I always relate this to a bow and arrow, right? A bow is the big part in the string of the bow and arrow. Think about a bow and arrow. If the string is taut, you can actually shoot the arrow faster. If it's slack, it's not as powerful. Your muscles and your fascia around your muscles act very much the same way. A lot of very explosive people are also a little tight. It creates a little elasticity in the fascia. Well, when you're growing really fast, when you get your growth spurt, your bones actually grow faster than your muscles and your fascia. So as your bones grow faster, it puts your muscles and your fascia on tension. And believe it or not, during that phase of your life, it's one of the best times to learn speed, because you're getting this reactive speed that you can't get like automatically like you could before. So we always are looking to see, like when kids are really young, we do tons of speed training. When they hit their growth spurts, we do tons of speed training. After their growth spurt, we know they have testosterone, so we start adding in hypertrophy training. And we call these developmental windows, but our training completely changes based on where you are developmentally. So I'm a huge believer in age-specific training. And these windows, let's call them, the more you learn, like I said, you learn that it's really hard to go back in time. I'm not saying you can't, it's just a lot harder. Sorry that went all over the place, but those two questions I think are different. Yeah.
You know what, that was worth the price of admission. So Dr. Virk, Dr. Rose just created millions of better athletes all over the country in the last 5 minutes. What do they do to stay away from you now that they're there? And when the injury happens, you alluded to it earlier, what do they do to recover aside from the rest? Like, you know what, let's shift this a little bit, right? Was there something, because Dr. Rose had these athletes, right? They came to you at the White Sox and Bulls. Let's be more specific about this. Was there something that you saw that was common among your healthiest athletes that were the Dr. Rose disciples, right? They followed very age-specific plans. They trained correctly. They made it to pro athletics. They saw you. Was there some commonality between the healthy ones and something that was prevalent in the persistent injured ones?
You know, the healthy ones ate an apple a day. They stayed away from the doctor. So the ones who didn't eat the apple, they showed up in my office. And I think, you know, again, with these star athletes, the time when I am interacting with them, they are at their peak. They are a different animal than an athlete who's passing through a pubertal stage or in their growing years and things like that. The thing that I was most impressed watching these elite players, you know, it sounded like it's like very easy for them, but they are very highly disciplined. They put a lot of stress and they have resources to help them as well on proper workout, proper strength training, eating right, all those things which we just say in a single phrase, they have a huge impact in their lives at that time because they are on the peak. For them, maintaining their excellence is more important because they're not going to go any further. They just want to avoid injury. They want to mitigate the risk of injury and they want to stay healthy in order to deliver, because right now they are at a stage where their training is done and they are delivering. So that is very different than a young adolescent patient who comes to me who is not at his peak, who has to attain his peak. So he doesn't know his abilities, and his coach is the one who would be the closest, who would know what this kid can achieve or not. So for a kid, it's important to, you know, safeguard them when they are in their growing phase and avoid everything, you know, that Dr. Rose mentioned in terms of age-specific training, in terms of, you know, other things that protect them. But, you know, that would be the two big things that I see when I'm dealing with an elite athlete who is at the peak of his career and young athletes. I don't know if I answered your question or not, but.
Thank you. So, Dr. Rose, you know, I'm going to ask you both about the future, but before we do, there's something that's come up for 10 years, and at New York Empire in particular, we've been telling kids, don't use a donut or a bat weight on deck. It will actually negatively impact your swing, other than have a placebo effect of making your bat feel light. So maybe there's a psychological intent factor that will be positive. But for a decade, we're telling people, don't dare use a donut. It will degrade bat speed. And did my research, right? I told you I waited a long time to sit in a room with you. And Dr. Rose said, using a bat weight is bad for hitting. Let's hear it.
So so we've done a ton, and I mean a ton of research on this, on overspeed, overload training, right? Which is basically going both spectrums, heavier than normal, and then lighter than normal. And no matter what research project you look at, and this has been done for decades from guys like Tom House and from us here, it will show you that the implement that typically increases your speed is the lighter one, not the heavier one, right? So the heavier one does a couple things. So when you swing a heavier implement, and by the way, like a donut, first of all, when you put it on, it's completely non-balanced, right? So all the weight is where the donut is, and it would obviously be much better if you could balance this like your typical, let's call it swing weight or bat weight. But when you put a heavy loaded implement on there, a couple things we know happen. Number one is if you are really tight, it can increase your range of motion, right? So you got this heavy load turning you, it kind of turns you farther. But I kind of said that a second ago that before you go play, I'm not sure if you want to have a new range of motion because now your timing, sequencing, coordination can be off. And usually people that swing a weighted donut, typically the first couple swings after that, their sequencing timing is off, right? It's different because they've got this bigger range of motion. Now, there are some people, I want to say there are some people that when they swing a heavier implement, they can produce more force from their hands. So let me say there's two ways to actually increase bat speed. We're going to talk about bat speed. Number one is you can increase the amount of force you apply to the bat. That's obvious. Put more force on it, it'll go faster. Number two is you can increase the amount of time you apply this force. So if you do take a bigger swing, you have more time to apply that force. A weighted bat can give you a bigger distance to apply the force, but a lot of times your coordination goes down, so you can't sequence it properly. But what it can do on some people is if you take a heavier bat, or if you swing the bat faster, if you take like in golf, if you take a faster backswing, to change direction requires more force because it's heavier. So just instinctively, you have to apply more force, which sometimes can increase the force production when you take away the weighted bat, right? So there are some people that do get an increase from the heavier speed. But I guess the better appropriate thing is if you want more bat speed before you play, which I'm not sure if you do, but okay, if you do want more bat speed before you go out into the deck, the research will show you should swing a lighter bat. Okay, so when you swing a lighter bat, your brain learns to go faster. And the best way to think of this is like, imagine if you wanted to learn how to run faster. You know, an easy way to learn how to run faster is run downhill. I don't know if we were all kids, a lot of times you're running down a hill and you get to the point you're like, oh my God, I'm running too fast. And you feel like you're going to fall over because your body doesn't know how to maintain the speed. But if you practice that over and over again, your body goes, all right, to actually run this fast, I need to lean my trunk in this angle. I got to put my feet in this position. A light bat does the exact same thing. When you're swinging a light bat, it's going really fast. Your brain is learning how to maintain this speed. So if you take any type of radar device or launch monitor device and you swing your normal bat, take a heavy bat, swing it a couple times, and then go swing yours, you'll see almost 99% of the players, speed will go down. If you take a lighter bat, you swing a lighter bat, and then go check yours, your speed will go up, which is just totally counter what it feels like, but that's the reality. So if you want more bat speed, we would tell you to do a lighter bat. Do a lighter bat and then go out to do yours. But I'm not sure if you want to do any of that before you play. I mean, most of the motor learning research would say is you want to simulate what you're about to go do. And neither of those simulate what you're about to go do. So I would experiment with that for sure.
Fantastic. So, you know, I want to be very respectful of your time, and I love that you're both here, but I do have one final question for both of you. And this may take the next hour just to get through this, right? What does the future hold? Because look, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, this conversation was very, very different. 10 years ago, the three of us don't even talk to each other because we all have egos and hate each other, and I know better than you and you know better than me, right? What does the future hold for athletic development, performance, and health?
Well, I can start this because I think, to me, like we started, I feel like there's so much science and technology out now, from sensors to equipment that are allowing us to evaluate the athlete in ways that we could never do before. It's almost like we have the MRI of sports now that we can put on our players and help prevent some of these overuse problems from happening in the first place and trying to keep things balanced. But I'll tell you the thing that I'm the most excited about, that I think Doc's going to talk about here in a second, hopefully, is some of the advances happening in medicine right now are just beyond amazing, right? And from the stem cells to like for example, we have a Champions Tour player by the name of Tom Pernice Jr., 8-time winner on PGA Champions Tour. Last year, full thickness tear, supraspinatus tendon for rotator cuff, full thickness tear. under fluoroscope and MRI. Had stem cell PRP combo injection last year. We have full regrowth under imaging and actually writing it up under study right now. The future of this type of medicine, regenerative medicine and stuff, is things that get me excited, because I'm like, Doc, if you ever need any guinea pigs, I'm your man. You can inject me with anything you want. Right? So I think it's a really exciting time to be alive. It really is.
Dr. Virk?
Yeah, so I think biologics, as we like to call them, they have a potential. Our biggest limitation right now is we know their potential. We don't know how to use them. So a very good example is PRP. A very good example is bone marrow aspirate. And, you know, half, or not even half, I would say 99% of doctors who are using it, they get handed a syringe and they're told, like, this is the juice and you can inject. They really don't know the biology. And the way the growth factors basically are proteins through which cells communicate with each other, either at a distance or in close proximity to that particular tissue. And Mother Nature is so great that it has such a fine balance that for every growth factor, it has a counter growth factor. And there are mechanisms when you get a bruise, you know, there's rupture of the capillaries or small veins, there are growth factors that are released, the cleanup is done. It's like a car crash, you know. You've got the 911 coming, you've got the ambulance, you've got the fire, you've got the police, somebody's cleaning up the glass, somebody's towing the car, and half an hour, FDR is open and people are driving back. Same thing in body, but if you try to simulate something without a proper understanding, there's going to be more issues. So I think the future is in biologics. If from medical community, the question I'm answering, but I think it's a long road ahead, and we got to be very, very conscious of what we are doing and keep some data. You know, it's a treatment which is not covered by insurance companies because there's no evidence. There's no evidence for PRP. I do a lot of research on stem cells, and insurance companies don't cover anything because there isn't a randomized control trial that proves the efficacy. But then there are isolated incidents, like, you know, Dr. Rose mentioned somebody having a full thickness small tear or a full or a partial thickness tear, and patient comes and say, why not? I had such a great relief. I want my friend to have it too. And then I'm telling them, listen, there's no evidence, it's out of pocket, and I want you to be aware before you get into this treatment. So that was just to highlight the challenges, but no doubt that is one of the exciting things. But, you know, Dr. Rose spoke for me, I'm gonna speak for him. I think we need more healthy and sustainable models for youth athlete development. And we as doctors will come into play when there are issues of acute injuries in which the injury force was more superior or powerful than the tissue. For example, a fracture. For example, a dislocation, where training and other things and all those things that I mentioned are not the real issues to fix. I got to fix in the fracture, or I got to fix the dislocation. But the real deal will be in those chronic injuries where my role is basically, why are you here? Go and talk to your coach and trainer and development and other guys, and then come back if you really need me for pain control. That's about it. So I think there is a role. We need to define the role. We need to talk. We need to come in with algorithms where, you know, ego has to be put aside, as you said, but be a team. And I think it will come. And I'm very optimistic. Just like-minded people have to come together with a common goal. And I think already people are on the forefront to make that happen, which is going to bring the tradition of this country, which is sports, you know, back to playing in a more safe and effective fashion.
So, you know, I listen, I'm going to borrow your words there, Dr. Virk. You know, we need people who are like-minded to come together and collaborate on these things. And I got to be honest, it's why I asked you, Dr. Rose, it's why I asked you, Dr. Virk, and it's why I asked you to be here together tonight. Because, look, I had very high expectations for what the two of you would bring to our community tonight. To say that you surpassed them would be an understatement. I am more appreciative than I even thought I would be. And I mean, look, Dr. Rose, you already know, I spent years waiting for the opportunity. What you have both now brought to our community just through this one webinar and through the information that you've shared up to now and what I hope you'll continue to share for years to come, and the collaboration that I look forward to. I'm going to speak on behalf of all of the players at New York Empire Baseball today, and every one of them that has yet to step through our doors. They owe both of you a debt of gratitude, as do I. So I can't thank you enough.
Thank you, Jordan. Thanks for everything you're doing, and I wish you and your whole community safe return. So keep doing what you're doing. Thanks so much for having me on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Dr.
Jordan,
Virk,
thanks for having me, and good luck with everything. All
have
right.
a great night. Thank you all.
Thanks, Doc.
Thank you.
See you. Yeah.
All right. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.